Iraq is on the way to being resolved one way or the other. Part of the debate in the United States has been as to a date fixed for withdrawal. That was the criticism made of Obama. Well, look at what's happened. The Bush administration has already settled with the Iraqis of a date for withdrawal, slightly over a year later than the date that Obama has been talking about. What will be needed, however, is if we withdraw, is a serious dialogue with all of Iraq's neighbors about the security consequences of American withdrawal and the consequences for them. And not a single one of them can envisage benefiting from unrest in Iraq without it spilling over into its own territory. Just look at the demographics and the geography of the region. And hence such a dialogue in the context of withdrawal has a chance of being constructive. And that brings to the third aspect, namely, if there is such a dialogue, it will help to negotiate with Iran about its nuclear problem. And we have to negotiate seriously, which means changing our posture, abandoning what is the current American posture, which is that we negotiate after the Iranians make a fundamental concession as a precondition to negotiations. And that is not a way to achieve a negotiating process. That's not the way to set it in motion. And there's something else we may be advised to give up, which is the useless and counterproductive threatening of military action. Because threatening military action unifies the Iranian populace, helps to bridge the enormous gap between the population at large and the mullahs, and doesn't help the negotiating process. It's an option which you can always keep in reserve if you really mean to use it, but it is not productive to negotiations. And quite frankly, I don't think it would be very productive if it was ever exercised, because a war with Iran would be a messy business indeed in the entire region, with a variety of local consequences and global economic consequences, which we know in advance will be disastrous, but the scale of which we cannot predict. So it's not a viable notion for an actual policy. And last but not least, we have to deal with Afghanistan and Pakistan. And here, to some extent, based on my own experience of dealing with that problem in relationship to another power, I think it is important that we do not over-militarize our effort, that we do not make the mistake that the other power did in Afghanistan. Yes, some deployment of troops may be necessary, and both presidential candidates in the United States have said so. But that cannot be the central focus of our efforts. Yes, some troops may be necessary, and that means also European troops participating on the basis of equality and not of preferential choice of sites, with some, for example, not even patrolling at night because it is dangerous. It means facing the risks together and paying the price together. But above all else, it means, in my judgment, demilitarizing the effort and politicizing it, and particularly seeking the possibility, exploring the possibility of negotiating arrangements with the Talibans, not Taliban, but Talibans in different parts of Afghanistan, in exchange for an arrangement in which their elimination or termination of al-Qaeda presence in their particular area would be reciprocated by military disengagement from that area. I think if we move in that direction, we will avoid the mistakes that the Soviets made and kept them very busy in a self-destructive fashion for some 10 years. Let me end by a final point briefly about itself, America itself, and it's a very parochial point. In my judgment, as we look ahead, and at the tenure of the next president, we'll have an intelligent foreign policy in America when we have an intelligent president. And we have just chosen one. But that's not enough. We need an intelligent public in America. And I can say from my own personal experience, and I think others can attest to it as well, that the American public, unfortunately, is woefully undereducated about the world. And we are a democracy. Our foreign policy has to reflect the popular will. That is just a basic fact of life. And we cannot have a complex intelligent policy in a complex age if the public is not educated about the world. It makes us susceptible when it is not to deliberately propagate it, demagogy. And lately it has been victimized by the propagation of a culture of fear. And that makes for paralysis in foreign policy. It also facilitates the activity on American soil of foreign lobbies. In the historical recent past, many or some of these lobbies capitalize an ideological appeal. Today, they're much more effective. They're capitalizing on money. And money goes a long way, and we have to be alert to that. And last but not least, the president himself has to tackle the fact that the American public needs education about the world. And he has to try to make the American public understand the new dimensions of the world. That is an essential task. That is a vital task that he has to undertake. And I think, without sounding overly partisan, and certainly not excessively deferential to the new president, that he has the intellectual and the rhetorical gifts to do just that. So let me simply end by saying, yes, we can.